Ranger fans to Forever Blueshirts, the radio show. I'm Jim Cerny, and we are joined this week by a very familiar face, a very familiar name, the guy who delivered the cup in 1994 and helped the Rangers end that long, long curse that has now progressed since then. And we can get into that as well with the trade deadline up ahead and many other topics to speak about with the former GM and president of the New York Rangers, Neil Smith. Neil, thanks for a few minutes today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's great to be on. And before you say anything, I know that I'm wearing this Chicago Blackhawks thing, but I have a friend that's one of the equipment managers for the Chicago Blackhawks. And since they were my favorite team as a kid with Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita and on and on, he sends me some swag, and that's why I have it on. And this hat has a Ranger logo on it. There it is, right there, the old Ranger logo. And it's got original six is what this stands for. So I like to wear only original six. I don't have a team to cheer on with the clothing and memorabilia, so I go with the original six.
And I know Ranger fans are Ranger fans, and they love their logo and jersey. It is hard to top the Chicago Blackhawks logo. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, it really is, and it always has been. And when I see the logo, I was telling somebody it takes me back to being a kid because it was such a mysterious place, Chicago. It was the gangsters were in Chicago, and you never saw a game out of the Chicago Stadium when you were living in Toronto. You only saw them come into Toronto. So there was such a mystique about Chicago, and then they had these uniforms, and it was really. Great childhood and great memories. And the Hawkhead brings me back to that all the time.
It's awesome. I know you're looking back, but it's great to come to the present and look to the future with you as well. I know you got the new NHL Wraparound podcast. Let's start there. What kind of made you, decide to kind of jump into that end of things in the hockey world?
Jim, my wife, Margaret, and I had been talking about me doing something that got my own thoughts out there and made my thoughts relevant. And we talked about doing a book, and I didn't want to do it. And then we talked about other things. And then her company was doing a podcast, and I understood a little bit, just a tiny, tiny bit of what a podcast was all about. So I started to think about doing a podcast. And I thought, it'd be neat to have like Dennis Potvin and me. So you have the Ranger and the Islander guy, or Brian Trutchik, because I'm friends with all those old Islanders from my Islander days.
Sure.
But then, I couldn't get it going. And suddenly my good friend Vic Morin writes to me that Disney laid him off. And I'm like, what? 35 years they're laying you off? Like, I was pissed, right? So I called him, and we talked about that for a while. And I called him back and said, we should do a podcast together. You got a great memory. You're a big, huge Rangers fan, but a huge hockey fan. And he did production for all of the contracts that ESPN had in the NHL. And I thought, this is the perfect guy because he's a producer. I'm not a producer. I'm the guy that talks, but I'm not a producer. He is. And boy, it's proven right, because I've been blessed to be with him now for this 8 months. We've been working on it. We've got 6 episodes out there. And the thing that we want to do, Jim, is we want to talk about the present, but we want to tie it back to the history of the game and some historical points in the game. So it doesn't mean we're talking about 1994 continuously, because we don't. We will when it comes to the 30th anniversary on June 14th. But we like to tie in things that have happened in the past with what's happening today, because so often you can predict what's going to happen today if they do something that you already saw in the past. And then how many times does that happen in the NHL?
Well, not just the NHL, and life in general. Just history repeats itself over and over again. And by the way, you know how to ease into these things, don't you, Neil? Your first show, you figure go kind of small, right? Just ease your way into it with Wayne Gretzky as your first guest. You talk about diving into the deep end. You just went right into the deep end there.
Yeah, we figured that would give us some street cred. by having Wayne on the show, and he was gracious enough to do it, which I'm very thankful for. And down the road, when Mess is less busy with his ESPN chores that he's doing and the outdoor games, and he's all over the place, and he's promised me, because he knows Vic too from ESPN, so he's promised us that he'll be coming on, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
You know what? Just because you mentioned it, go down that alley a little bit. What do you think? Critique his work. What do you think about Mess on TV? I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how it would go down when I heard he was going to be on, but boy, he's gotten really comfortable and he's just a relaxed way about him. I enjoy watching him on, on the broadcast. I was wondering what your take is.
No, mine's the same, and I've texted him a few times and said, "You look really good. I like your analysis." I got to tell you, I liked it better when Chelios was on with him, because I thought that was a great, a partnership from those two. But Mark has definitely gotten more comfortable with it. He seems to be the Mark that I know now, that is great laughter, great insights, obviously, and solid opinions, like strong opinions. He's not a guy that's going to be wishy-washy when he talks about some things. I loved watching him before the outdoor game. I think he's really good now. And yes, is it surprising? I think so, because Mark doesn't need to do that. He's not doing it because he needs the money. He's doing it to stay involved in the game, and good for him. I'm really happy for him.
Strong opinions and all that. So let's hop into the NHL trade deadline that's going to be coming up on March 8th. I'm sure you've got some thoughts about it. And let's start with the Rangers and give me your take on this, because you've been in this position before, obviously, making those calls ahead of the deadline. I wrote a story yesterday about how I think the Rangers and Chris Drury face a little bit of a dilemma on what they do here, because this group has a really great chemistry. You go into that locker room, that's a tight team. And just the young guys that they brought in and added to the mix, the Johnny Brodzinskis or Adam Edstrom's, Matt Rempe's, maybe not their best players, but yet real glue guys, and it fit in immediately with the bigger group. So all that said, you still want to do the right thing. You've got a cup contender on your hands. You want to put them in the best place possible to try and win the Stanley Cup again. So how big a dilemma is this? How cold-blooded do you have to be, if that's the right way to put it, as a GM, to make these difficult decisions before the deadline? Because you don't want to upset the apple cart, which has been a good year so far, but yet you want to put that team in the best possible footing, to try and win the Stanley Cup.
An excellent question, and well put. I didn't think that what they did last year was advisable. Now, I think Patrick Kane has had an amazing career, and he's doing some amazing things this year in Detroit. But I think you just nailed it when you said, like, you've got a tight chemistry, you've got a tight group, and all of a sudden somebody completely from the outside comes in and displaces the group. Because what happens is a guy comes in, let's say he's a player that's going to play on the power play. Well, guess what? Somebody doesn't get to play on the power play because he's come in. And that guy rides to practice with his best buddy that's also on the team that he's talking to all the time. And they're talking to other people. And it's not that they don't like the new guy, but he hasn't been part of the team all year. And now all of a sudden he's got to be part of the team. And and as you said, if it's a tight group, this is going to be tough. Now, the one thing that you could still do today is, if you are talking about a player that one of your leaders has played with in the past, or one of your important players can endorse for you to the rest of the players, then it's a different thing. And back in 94, when we made all those trades, Glenn Anderson, very familiar with all the guys there. Two guys were coming in from Chicago that were familiar with Keenan, and Craig McTavish, very familiar to the players there. So when those players walk in the locker room, and they were support players, all of them, they were welcomed because people knew who people knew them. They were all veterans, and it didn't upset our apple cart, your words, because they were known. But I think you've got to be really careful with the team chemistry coming down the line, if you are going to bring somebody in that's a significant cog at the deadline. And that's why I've always said you can't bring a goalie in at the deadline. A goalie is too big of a part of the team that you're going to change your goalie. Like, for example, right now, if New Jersey trades for a goalie now, well, like, who is this guy? Where'd he come from? Well, what are we doing here? What about this guy and that guy? And the nicknames. Dawsey. Where's Dawsey going? That kind of thing. It can be upsetting, and especially with a goalie. And I've been proven right on that, because if you look back, you'll never see a team that made a goalie change at the deadline that had a significant improvement in their team performance. Yes, Colorado got Patrick Waugh during the season and went on to win the cup, but that was during the season. There was a lot of time for that to mesh.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here. What if the goalie's got term on that deal, like a Jacob Markstrom, just using him as an example, and New Jersey makes the deal for him now? Yeah, they're trying to get themselves into the playoffs here, but they're looking big picture as well, because they'd still have him past this season. Is it still too much of an upsetting thing? Is that still a move that you would prefer to make in the offseason?
Well, no, that's a good call. If you're bringing in a player, like if you've got a deficiency, and we all know that they haven't had good goaltending this year, the Devils. And so if you're going to bring in a Markstrom, if you can get Markstrom, everybody in the locker room is going to look around and say, this guy could get us into the playoffs. This is a good move. I mean, right now, the Devils just want to get in the playoffs, right? I mean, they can't be shooting much higher than that at this point. So, yes, I take that back. In that situation, I guess I was more referring to a deadline deal from a contending team. I think I don't consider the Devils a contender for the cup. I consider them a contender to make the playoffs. And so, yes, that would be a move well endorsed by the team.
I know you don't like to make predictions on, where this player might go here, this player might go there. But looking at the Rangers situation, probably need a top line right wing, certainly looking into that. Maybe a third line center as well, especially with Filipino out for the season. Of course, Blake Wheeler out for the season as well. I say, if I'm sitting in the GM's chair, I know Johnny Brodzinski's been a nice player on that third line. I'm not letting a Brodzinski or a Rempe, who are great stories, great teammates, and part of that chemistry, stand in the way of me maybe getting an Adam Henrique, for example, as the third line center, or just because, they might be popular. It might be the flavor of the moment, or what have you. You're significantly upgrading that team. And going to your point, I think it's well known around the league that Adam Henrique is a quality guy. He's probably not going to cause turmoil in that dressing room. He's not that type of player or personality. Right. So that said, it's kind of a wind-up, build-up question here. If the Rangers had to make a couple moves before the deadline, maybe even a third move for a defenseman, if you think that they need that as well, do you go down the road? Do you pull those triggers? Or do you think one mid-range move is the better way to go? How do you approach the deadline if you're the New York Rangers?
I think you look at your lineup and you say, there's a long future there for Edstrom. There's a long future there for Remke. Even with Brodzinski, I think he's played really well. If they had to send him down, they're not sending down millions of dollars. He got the one-way contract. I think it was $875 or something. On defense, who is their number 6 defenseman? Can we upgrade that? And I don't think that is upsetting your chemistry, because this is a support players, and you talk to them and they know the rest of the group knows they're young players and their day's coming. So I think when you can upgrade your support players, that's the way to go. And of course it worked for me, so obviously I believe in it. But I don't think that you can hesitate and say, well, it's not fair to Remke, or it's not fair to Edstrom, or it's not fair to this guy, to do that because, they fit into the group. And you have to do what you can do to upgrade. But if you try to go from and I'm making this up totally, so don't take me seriously, but if you try to go from Zibanejad to some better center, you're going to upset the apple cart. You're going to upset the chemistry. And or if you try to go, one up a Panarin or one up a Kreider or that kind of thing. I don't believe in that. And in fact, Jim, I look back at all trade deadlines going back, I don't know, forever. And there's only one time that I could ascertain that at the deadline, a team picked up a star player in the league and went on to win the cup. Only one time. And that was Rob Blake for the Colorado Avalanche when he joined Raymond Bourque on that defense, and they won the cup that year. But I've looked at every other Stanley Cup winner, and I've gone through their roster, and did they pick up a star at the deadline? And it was always no.
It's a great point. Yeah, the recent years you see, like Tampa was always very active before the deadlines, and the years that they made it, they're adding Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman. Those were like the missing links to those teams. Yeah, there's a name, and not those two, but somebody who played with them who is an intriguing option. I think at the deadline for a contender, whether it be the Rangers or someone else, and that's Tyler Johnson. Now that he's healthy again, guy that can play center in the wing. Obviously, Chicago could retain half that salary because they're not, near the, the ceiling and the cap. Your thoughts on him? And as a guy, a two-time Cup winner, and a fit, whether it be New York or somewhere else.
I mentioned him on our show yesterday, or it just came out today, but that 119 playoff games for Tyler Johnson. You want a guy that's a playoff experienced guy. When you pick up those pieces, you'd like to have people that understand the playoffs is a different animal than the regular season. And Tyler Johnson certainly does. So yes, I think he'd be a pickup. If I can mention a couple others though from the same era, I think that Belmar would be a great pickup for somebody because of the fact that he's been through 80 something playoff games. He reminds me of getting McTavish in '94. He's that guy that's going to play a role for your team. Let the stars play the way they have to play, but you're a shutdown guy. So I think he would be a good pickup. Another guy in the same vein is Eric Johnson in Buffalo, who's got tons of playoff experience from the Avalanche and won a cup 2 years ago there. Originally a first overall pick, still got game, still got size. He would be a wonderful pickup to upgrade one of your bottom three, let's say. And there's others out there, but I'm sure we'll discuss some others. But I looked, the one thing about Adam Henrique that bothers me, and everything you said is right. Obvious character, obvious pedigree, obviously a UFA. Pat Verbeek won't be asking for the moon, I wouldn't think. Okay. The only thing that bothers me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's played in a playoff game since 2012.
Would be correct.
So
that's a great point.
That's 12 years ago. And not that he's forgotten how to play in the playoffs. And he might be a great pickup, and he might be really good. I'm just saying when you
juiced as well, right? He could be extra juiced for that. Hey, man, have I missed this? And this could be my final whack at it.
Absolutely. But I think when you're considering and analyzing all the parts, I'm not saying that makes you not do it because his character overrides that. I'm just saying that is something. If we're gonna say Tyler Johnson's played 119 games and that's why he's a good pickup, we also have to mention that Adam Henrique hasn't played in 12 years.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Someone that we've written a lot about heading into the deadline, somebody that has an extra year, still another year to go on his contract, but it's an affordable deal and kind of checks off a lot of the boxes. He had been a Ranger. He had success here. He helped them get to the conference final 2 years ago. Is Frank Vatrano, who really helped drive that line with Zibanejad and Kreider 2 years ago. just kind of a straightforward, fast skating, shoot first guy. Physical when he needs to be. He was just a really good fit, albeit in a small window after the trade deadline. But he's somebody that really intrigues me. I know intrigues Anthony and a lot of people on our staff. Just your thoughts on that. Also knowing that you wouldn't just be getting Frank Vatrano for the rest of this season, but you'd have to pay for getting him next season as well, one more season.
Yeah, my prediction on that, and I haven't talked to Pat Verbeek, and I certainly haven't talked to Chris. My prediction on that's Pat Verbeek's biggest chip that he has for a contender, and on top of that, he's got term, like you just said. So he's going to want a lot. I mean, maybe I'd be making it up and fantasizing if I said what it is, but like I'm sure at least a first round pick, and especially from a contending team that's picking low. So I don't see it happening, and I don't see the Rangers saying, "Oh well, let's give them what they want in the future." Like I just don't see it happening. But Jim, would he be a good fit? Absolutely. Does he know the locker room? Absolutely. I mean, has he had a terrific year in Anaheim? He sure has. So all those things are right. I just don't see how it happens.
Smith is our guest here on Forever Blueshirts today, talking trade deadline with them. Rangers are in a good spot right now. No question. They're battling for the top spot overall in the league. Just won 10 games in a row. Now it's 10 out of 11. They've been at the top of their division pretty much the entire season. So we can debate what they should do, what they might do, what they can do. But what team out there, maybe it's the Rangers, you can make that argument if you like, but what team out there that's a serious contender needs to most make a deal at this deadline, in your opinion? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a hard question too, because I don't have any materials in front of me to sort of look down at.
Yeah.
But
just off the top of your head.
Well, off the top of my head, Vegas has had a lot of injuries, and if they want to do a two-peat or repeat, I guess they should say, they're going to have to do something. I wouldn't be surprised because they're very aggressive. The other team that's not a complete team, but I can't tell you exactly where their incompleteness comes in, but is Colorado. Colorado's a team that I saw them earlier in the year, and I thought, gosh, they're a powerhouse. When they played the Islanders, they were just unbelievable. But now there's a lot of games where they've taken the night off. Now Nichushkin is back, so that'll add a lot. But again, that's another offensive piece. Where do they need help? Help me with the name, because I'm going to mispronounce it when I say Grigoriev.
Yeah.
Gorgiev. Sorry. I always think of George when I see that name.
Well, they called him Georgie.
Oh, did they? Well, because it was easier to say than Gorgiev.
Exactly.
That's how hockey players are. You either put an IE at the end or a Y at the end, or that's how we do it.
So, I'm going to take you off the tangent here, because, Neil Smith is a pretty, let's face it, it's a pretty basic name, right? You're not setting yourself up for a lot of nicknames. Was it Smitty when you were younger, coming up, playing? What would they call you?
Well, you know what? I don't remember having any nicknames at all. And I got to college, played, college hockey on a scholarship, and everybody in the locker room had a nickname, except for me. I was Neil. And the reason in my locker room that happened, I think, is because we had a Smitty. We had a guy named Steve Smith, and he'd always been called Smitty, and I called him Smitty, and everybody did. And I think with me, they didn't really have something to go to. And my mother said to me, when I'd ask her, why did you name me Neil? And she said, well, you couldn't lengthen it, you couldn't shorten it, you couldn't do those things with it. You wouldn't get teased at school by them doing something like that. So that's where it came from. And of course, there's a lot of Neils around now that came from Neil Armstrong, landing on the moon, and then parents, young parents at that point probably said, "We'll name him Neil." No, so I didn't really get that. Glenn Sather always used to call me Smitty all the time. I didn't care. I didn't particularly like it, but it is what it is.
Glenn Sather calls you Smitty. Smitty's good, right?
Yeah. As long as he keeps giving me guys like Messier and Tikkanen, and then he call me whatever you want. Just trade me all those good players.
Absolutely. You mentioned your mom there, and that just takes me off on another tangent. I know in the past you told me about her playing days. She played,
Yeah.
and I just want to bring that to the present now. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the new women's league and having kind of the financial heft behind this league finally for them, and they're playing in first class arenas, and they have health insurance and proper contracts, again, contracts that they can actually make a living with, not having to work 2-3 other jobs. I know it's kind of a big buildup, but just wondering if you had any thoughts about the PWHL, the new women's league.
Well, first of all, it is really unique the way they did it with the one owner of the 6 teams. Mark Walters is along with Billie Jean King. The other thing that they did is they have given the players and the support to the league that it needs to try to be successful in the long term. They're gonna. I've talked to Brian Burke. They're gonna lose a lot of money for the first few years in trying to get this thing going. I think it's great that there is a women's league now that has a chance to be successful. I think that I think it's good for hockey because it's good to get everybody involved in hockey. I think the inclusion word, it means include everybody, and I think that's really good. I think it's wonderful. My mom played hockey. It's surprising to a lot of people because my mom played hockey, and if her day was today, she'd be in the PWHL because she was that good. And I have all the newspaper articles and everything from back then. But it was 1937. It was before World War II. And there was a lot of women playing hockey. I mean, it was popular. A lot of people went to the games. And they practiced outdoors and all this stuff that, because there wasn't that many indoor arenas. I, by the way, played a season outdoors when I was a kid. One of the teams I played on the home ice was an outdoor rink. But having said that, I think it's just good for hockey to have women involved and to have a women's league. And I think that this PWHL has the foundation behind it to actually become successful as an enterprise. And I sure hope they do.
We don't want to carry you too much longer. You've been so generous with your time today. 30-year anniversary of the Stanley Cup. So, we have to flip back to 94 a little bit. We did already, talking about the trade deadline. Tell me if I'm right on the mark with this. And maybe it's not a black and white question, but so many times, I do interviews or I talk to people, hockey fans, about 94 and that season, 93, 94. And I argue that the biggest trade of that season didn't happen at the deadline. Not that getting Stefan Metto, it wasn't huge, or McTavish or Anderson, Noonan, all the guys that you mentioned before. But to me, the guy that really, in my mind, solidified this group is when you landed Steve Larmer at the beginning of the season. I know he came along with Nick Kypreos. You got a couple guys in that deal. But boy, that move to me, what he brought, and he gets so overlooked. So he's such a quiet guy, but I don't know that there's a thing on the ice he didn't do well. Offensive zone, neutral zone, defensive zone. I still look at the picture, the final face-off, and people are starting to celebrate, the gardens erupting, everything. You tell me what Steve Larmer's doing. He's finishing his check. He's taking his guy into the back wall. that is Steve Larmer. So I guess your thoughts about Steve, that trade, how that came together, and if you agree about just the important role that he played for that team.
Well, let me give you one bit of trivia from what you were just talking about. So when that face-off happened, Jeff Brown came down the boards, and that was Jeff Brown that Steve Larmer was pinning up against the boards when the famous photo went off. This is factual, what I'm going to say. Jeff Brown reached down, grabbed the puck, and to this day still has the game puck from this game 7. And I talked to him about a month ago. He still got it in a safe someplace. And I said, well, Jeff, if you ever want to sell it, I said, I said, I'm not talking cheap either. I know it's worth money, but I said, there's no more better puck than that puck. That was the last puck, and when the buzzer went, the Rangers had won the cup. Anyway, that's a trivia piece aside. The Steve Larmer thing.
Story.
Yeah, the Steve Larmer story is, first of all, we all knew how good Steve Larmer was. He was at the time, he was the current Iron Man of the league. When he decided to sit out and wouldn't play until he got traded, he broke his own Ironman record when he did that. Mike Keenan was on this one. I got to say, I knew Larmer and how good he was. Mike Keenan wanted him because he played in Chicago. Anybody that played in Chicago, Keenan wanted, right? Because everybody there was great. So I started to talk to Pulford about Larmer, and I couldn't get anywhere. And the reason I couldn't get anywhere, and that was, what was it, November? Was it November? So you're early in the season, and they hate Keenan. Pulford, everybody there hates Keenan. They don't want to send him to New York because then they've given him to Keenan. So that's why I had to go through Hartford to get him. And in Hartford was Paul Holmgren was the GM. And Paul and I worked on this. What will you give me if I can get Larmer? And we worked on it, and it ended up being Turcotte and Patrick. And he had another tough guy. Don't ask me who, because I can't remember. You could look it up on Hartford that year. And he said to me, okay, you got to take Kiprios too. Because of they were a small market team. They couldn't take all the money. I'm not going to turn down taking Nick if I can get Steve Larmer. And as it turns out, Nick played in game 7, so I mean, it wasn't like a bad pickup, but it wasn't my intention to get Nick Kiprios. My whole focus was, how do I get Steve Larmer? So then when I called Steve Larmer and said, Steve, we've just made a trade to get you. You know what he talked to me about? How bad is the traffic there? Because I hate the traffic in Chicago, and I don't want to go to another place where there's heavy traffic. I said, you're not going to have to worry about any traffic. You'll live in Rye probably. You practice in Rye. It's a couple blocks away from where you're going to be living. When you play a game in Manhattan, you'll come in and you'll stay at the hotel across the street during the daytime. And I said, you won't face any traffic at all. He says, okay, great. That was my conversation with him.
It's a beauty. Having obviously spent time with Steve Larmer, this does not surprise me, this conversation.
Yeah, and he's still to this day is a friend.
Yeah.
I talk to him whenever I can. I have his picture on the wall beside me here with his autograph on it from the Stanley Cup. And he should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He really should be. I mean, he's won a cup, and anybody that knows hockey from that era knows Steve Larmer was an all-star. Every team would have loved to have Steve Larmer.
Listen, we're going to let you go here because, you've been so generous with your time, but let's try and get you back in and around June. And, maybe we'll delve a little bit more into 93, 94, because I know you never get asked about the 93, 94 team ever. So, but it would
I
be
get
fun
introduced, Jim. Here's how I get introduced to people. Okay. I swear this is it. So my life started at training camp. I was born at training camp in 1993. And I died around June 15th, 16th of 1994, because people will introduce me like this. Do you know, this is Neil Smith. He was the general manager of the Rangers when they won the cup. That's it.
When we won the cup.
Yeah, when they won the
Not
cup. He was a
before,
general
not
manager when they won the
after.
cup.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it was not the 11 years, not turning it from what I got left from Phil Esposito's regime, which was good players, by the way, with Brian Leach and Mike Richter. Not what I did to build it up for 5 years, not what I was trying to do at the end when we were trying to rebuild. Just the guy that was the general manager when they won the cup. So I find it funny because we all get a tag put on us when we get introduced to people. This is Jim Cerny. He used to work for the Rangers. This is, and so I get it by now, but it's like, I'll often laugh about it. Say, yeah, that's all I've ever done in my life is that one thing, So it's funny.
From now on, when we do these, and we've done a lot of these over the years, but when we do these, I will just introduce you as, you know what, he's a really good guy. He's Neil Smith, because that would not be a lie. So how's that?
That's great. And you know what? The one thing that's the one thing that I've tried to achieve in my life is to leave this earth with people saying he was a really good guy. And if I can accomplish that, what more do I need? That's all I need.